Welcome everyone to another week of Ramban ala Parsha. This week we have the schus of reading Parshas Pekudei, and there's a double benefit to reading Parshas Pekudei. First of all, just point out the obvious, it's a shorter Kriyas HaTorah. Normally we read Vayakel Pekudei, but also allows us to focus only on Pekudei, on what's unique about Parshas Pekudei. And the point that everyone starts with is the obvious point. The repetition over and over again of Kasher Diber Hashem el Moshe, or a form of that. I think it's 18 times in the Parsha. On a basic level, we understand that had God not commanded Moshe to build a Mishkan, it would have been maybe a form of Avodah Zarah. But the Ramban has an interesting insight into Kasher Tziva Hashem el Moshe. It's possible that Rashi has the same insight. Let's start with the Ramban. So the pasuk in the first parak of this week's parsha, in parak Chavchet, pasuk Chabet says, "Uvitzalel ben Uri ben Chur lematei Yehuda asa eit kol asher tziva Hashem et Moshe." So kind of there are two questions. First of all, did Bitzalel build a Mishkan all by himself? What about all the Chachamim and the people who volunteered? They also had a chelik in the Mishkan. Bitzalel didn't build it by himself. And second of all, the phrase Kasher Tziva Hashem et Moshe. So says the Ramban on pasuk Chavbet, Ha'inyan, ki al piv na'asa hakol. It's true. Bitzalel was in charge of everything. Ki hu hamoreh l'chol ha'chachamim u'lefanav ha'yosim kulam. Right? He was the person who taught each of the chachamim how to build the thing that he was going to build. Umarim elav kol malachtam kimo shamar u'lahorot natan belibo. Right? It was given into Bitzalel's heart, and then he shared it with the people. Aval, says the Ramban, Gam kol chachmei lev asu b'melacha. It's not like Bitzalel built a whole Mishkan. The chachmei lev built a Mishkan. But Bitzalel led them. And everybody who finished something, who finished the task, brought it to Bitzalel to ask, is this okay? Kimo shamar, the pasuk says, the pasuk says definitively, Vayasu kol chacham lev ba'osei melachat Mishkan. They did build the Mishkan. They did participate in building the Mishkan. But Bitzalel played a role. And here I want to suggest the role Bitzalel played is very similar to what we normally find the role that Moshe played. Right? We would have thought, and in other places the Ramban points out that, yes, they brought things to Moshe and then he told them what to do. But with respect to the Mishkan, they brought things to Bitzalel and he told them what to do. Now, why does this matter? So the Ramban says, Al dat Rabotenu. This is special praise to Bitzalel. She'afilu divarim shelo amar lo rabo hiskima da'ato l'mashe ne'emar l'Moshe misinai. Even the things that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't tell Bitzalel to do, or maybe in certain circumstances he told him to do something, but Bitzalel understood otherwise, Bitzalel was right. Here's a good example. The Ramban doesn't mention it, but it's obvious this is what the Ramban's referring to. Rashi quotes the Medrash on this week's parsha, on the pasuk. Uvitzalel ben Uri ben Chur asad kol asher tziva Hashem et Moshe asher tziva oto Moshe ein ktiv kan ela kol asher tziva Hashem et Moshe afilu dvarim shelo amar lo rabo hiskima da'ato l'mashe amar l'Moshe b'Sinai. Right, and the example that the Medrash brings is that Moshe told Bitzalel to build the Kalim and then to build the Mishkan, the enclosure. And Bitzalel said, no, I think we should do the opposite. He said, first you build a house, then you put the things in it. And Moshe Rabbeinu said to him, you know what, you're right. Right? And that's why it's the whole idea. Bitzalel, from the word Bitzel, Kel, Hayita, you really heard what God says. So says Rashi, and I think says the Ramban as well, that it's Kasher Tziva Oto Elokim, or Kasher Tziva Hashem et Moshe, not how Moshe understood it, but how God really commanded him. Okay? And it continues, V'lo baha katuv lo mashu asa kol. It doesn't mean that Bitzalel built the whole Mishkan. Ela shekiyem b'chol hana'aseh al yado kol asher tziva Hashem et Moshe. Everything that he did was Kasher Tziva Hashem et Moshe. Ulefikach. Lo amar b'chol hana'asad heina kasher diber Hashem el Moshe. Ki aya b'mashma kasher amar Moshe b'dvar Hashem. That would sound like he did what Moshe told him to do, which is not what happened. V'hu shina haseder bahem mima shamar lo Moshe, but he changed the order in the example that I gave. Ulefikach kolal ze bekan lomar she'asa kol kasher amar Hashem ki Moshe katavti lamala. Okay, so on the one hand, this is a great shot and it's a great insight. On the other hand, it's hard not to raise the obvious question, which is, what does it mean that Moshe misunderstood? What does it mean that Moshe misheard? We learned the Torah's Moshe. Our understanding is based, and our belief is based on the fact that Moshe was a faithful scribe and told us over exactly what HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him. So I don't know the answer, and maybe I shouldn't have raised the question because I don't know the answer. But I'll suggest one thing. It strikes me that with respect to the Mishkan, we find examples of Moshe not understanding. Moshe hit kasher, lavin, how do you build a menorah? And then God did it for him. It could be that with respect to the Mishkan, Bezalel had an intuitive sense. Bezalel was an artist. Bezalel was, his heart was raised by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It could be that with respect to the Mishkan, Moshe had difficulty. He didn't understand. According to the Ramban, he didn't understand how you could recreate Maimad Har Sinai in miniature, bin Nistar in the Mishkan. But Bezalel did. So with respect to the Mishkan, Moshe didn't always understand and Moshe didn't always get what HaKadosh Baruch Hu was telling him. But Bezalel had an intuitive sense and he did get. But this problem that Moshe had with the Mishkan does not extend in any way to any other portions of the Torah. What Moshe Rabbeinu reported to us, we can take as literally the gospel truth, and that's how we learn Torah, and that's how we take it. Okay, but the idea that when it says Kashet Tziva Hashem et Moshe, it means as God really commanded Moshe, and not as Moshe understood him, that's a bit of a chiddush, which Rashi has and the Ramban has as well. Okay. The Parsha continues with a very interesting example, which I think most of us notice on our own. Says the Torah, Vayas ha'ifod zahav tchelet va'argaman v'tolat shani v'sheish marzar. How'd they make it? Vayirakeu et pachei hazahav v'kitzeit pitzilim. They chopped up the gold and they made little strands. La'asot b'toch ha'tchelet v'toch ha'argaman v'toch tolat ha'shani v'toch ha'sheish ma'aseh choshev. So when you read the first pasuk, you think to yourself, what does it mean there are gold strands that they wove into the other strands and they used it? That's not how gold looks to me. Okay, but then the Torah tells us how they did it. And it's interesting because the Torah doesn't normally tell us how things were built in the Mishkan. And says the Ramban that exact point. Vayirake'u et pachei hazahav lo hosif b'chol melechet hakodesh lefaresh derech ha'omunot. There are no examples of how you build it. How you build a shulchan, how you build a mizbeach. You have to build a mizbeach, and the people did it. They have to build a shulchan, and the people did it. But here, the Torah tells us how it was done. V'hara'ui sheyomar, it would have made more sense to say, V'yasu ha'ta'ifot zahav tchelet v'argaman, etc., etc., ma'aseh choshev, kitefot asulo, just tell us the result. Ki keina derech b'chulam, that's how the Torah always describes the kelim of the Mishkan. So Siddur Rahman, it's obvious, but it's beautiful. V'yitachen shesiper bekan hamachshava shechidshu b'chutei hazahav. It could be that here the Torah tells us the chiddush about how they made gold into threads. I understand you can twine and you can work with tzemer and pishtim, but not zahav. And so the Torah tells us exactly how it happened. Ki lo nishma ad hayom hahu la'asot kain. It wasn't just a chiddush; it was a form of a miracle that people took gold and wove it within other materials. So the Ramban, because it was a miracle, because it was a chiddush, because it was something that no one understood, and again, the sense we get when we read the psukim is, how could that happen? So the Torah goes out of his way to describe it, because it's kind of miraculous that happened. Okay, let's continue in the parsha. It's Perek Chavtet Pasuk Membet. Says the Torah, Kechol ashet tziva Hashem et Moshe, Kain asu b'nei Yisrael eit kol ha'avodah. And the Ramban's interested in this lashon, Kain asu b'nei Yisrael eit kol ha'avodah. What makes it avodah? So says the Ramban, Kol ha'melechet ha'mishkan v'yikra'ena avodah. It's referring to the work of building the Mishkan, and it's called avodah. Lomar, ki asu ota la'avodat Hashem hanichbad, ki inyan va'avadetem et Hashem Elokechem, or va'oto ta'avodu. Says the Ramban, you might have thought that it's only the result that matters. It's only the fact that there is an aron, and there is a shulchan, and there is a menorah, and there are mizbachot. Says the Ramban, no. The building of these things is avodat Hashem. The building of these things is va'avadetem et Hashem Elokechem, is va'oto ta'avodu. Says the Ramban, it's not just the result of a mitzvah that matters. It's the effort that you put into the mitzvah. It's the means as well as the ends. And so the Ramban says the Torah refers to the work of the Mishkan as avodah, because that's exactly what it was. It's avodat Hashem. It's va'oto ta'avodu. How do I worship God? I built the aron. I built the shulchan. I built the menorah. Wait, is that really avodah? Yes, says the Ramban, that's avodat Hashem. It's true that having a menorah that I can light is a mitzvah. But making a menorah, this isn't a discussion of how many mitzvahs or how we count Taryag mitzvahs. This is a substantive discussion. Says the Ramban, it's a mitzvah not in the Taryag mitzvahs, but it's a mitzvah in the sense that it's avodat Hashem. That when I build something for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the actual act of building is avodat Hashem. It's nothing less and it's nothing more than that. Now, if we wanted to expand on that, we could relate it to our lives and our focus and our function. Sometimes we think it only matters if we understand something. That's Talmud Torah. It only matters something. Taking a lulav and esrog, that's the mitzvah, and it's true, that's the mitzvah. But says the Ramban, buying it and baking the matzah and preparing ourselves for the seder and preparing ourselves, that's also avodat Hashem, and that's what the Torah is telling us. When it says, Kain asu b'nei Yisrael et kol ha'avodah, don't think for a second that it's only the result. It's the means to the end that also count for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, now we come to the main Ramban on this week's parasha. Perek Mem, and this really goes to sort of the flow of the parashiyos. And we've talked about it before, and we'll talk about it again now. Says the Ramban, the Torah says, Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe lemor. Biyom hachodesh harishon be'achad lachodesh takimet Mishkan Ohel Moed. We get a date. Yom hachodesh harishon, it's Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Be'achad lachodesh, right? It's the first month. It's Nisan. Moshe Rabbeinu should establish or should build, or should not really either establish or build, but erect the Mishkan, right? All the raw materials are presented. All the kelim are done. All the boards are built. All the sockets, all the adanim, everything is prepared. But nobody's put it up yet. And says the Ramban, it's Moshe's job to put it up when? On Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And here we get to a big machlokes, Tanaim and Amoraim and Rishonim as well. What is it talking about? So says the Ramban, B'yom HaChodesh Rishon B'achad LaChodesh Takim et Mishkan Ohel Moed Al Dat Rabotenu Shehu Yom Shmini LaMiluim. Says the Ramban, yes, there's a week of Miluim, there's a week of preparation, and then comes the day. This is the 8th day of Miluim, and it is the first day that the Mishkan is erected and actually serves as the Mishkan. Ta'am HaKatuv, Shetakim et HaMishkan, V'ya'amod Kain, Lo Toridenu V'lo Takimu Od. Says the Ramban, the Torah is telling us, Moshe, this is it. When you put up the Mishkan on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, that's it. You're not taking it down again. You're not putting it up again. This is the Mishkan totally functioning. Ki b'niso hamachanot haleviyim yoridu oto v'yakimu oto. Moshe doesn't do it. The Levim will take it down when they travel. V'lo hutzrach litzavot atal hakamat shivat hayamim harishonim. Now, the Torah doesn't tell us anything about the 7 days of preparation, Ki amar lo mitchila v'hakemotat hamishkan kemishpato asher hareta bahar. So the Ramban assumes, as he does many places, HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe all about the Yimei HaMiluim on Har Sinai, and now he's putting it up. V'kevan shepiresh lo ata ki biyom hachodesh harishon tiyeh hakamato la'omda. Since God is telling Moshe on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, that will be the actual, beginning of the functioning of the Mishkan. Hine yada ki bi'et Yimei HaMiluim yitztarech la kimu lahorid. So Moshe understood, well, if the opening day of the Mishkan is Rosh Chodesh Nisan, then presumably I have to start preparing for it on the 23rd day of Adar. Right? That's 7 days before. There is such a thing. V'ulai hayakein. Now, why did there have to be 7 days of Miluim? And you'll obviously recall that Parsha Shmini in Vayikra, Vahi Bayom HaShmini, that's exactly the day that we're talking about here. And we'll have to deal with that. But that's exactly what we're talking about on the 8th day. V'ulai hayakein, maybe the purpose of the 7 days of Miluim was lahargil halevim b'maasehu. Ki mimenu yiru v'chein yasu. All the Levim and the Kohanim will watch Moshe Rabbeinu. They'll know how to put it up. They'll know how to take it down. They'll know how to bring karbanos. They'll know how to do all the actions, all the avodot of the Mishkan, because that's what Moshe did. O hayal lahachtir hayom ba'atara zo. It's also possible that the day of Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which is a special day, we know the Mishnah, Asara Kitarim Nitnu, something like that, Rosh Chodesh Nisan. This is one of the Kitarim. This is one of the crowns that the day was Zocha to have. V'nireh l'da'atam, according to this approach, ki b'shivat hayamim harishonim hayam meikim oto baboker. Every morning of the 7 days of Miluim, Moshe Rabbeinu put up the Mishkan. V'omeid kein kol hayom v'chol halayla, and the Mishkan stayed all day and all night. Uke'alot hashachar, as the sun came up, as the dawn broke in the morning, hayom moridoto v'chozer umikimo miyad. So says the Ramban, Lemaisa, the Mishkan stood, all day long and all night long. Right before dawn, Moshe Rabbeinu took it down and put it up again. Ki hakatuv omar upetach ol moed teshvu yomam v'layla. If you have to sit yomam v'layla at the petach ol moed, ve'ein petach lo ol moed rak be'eit hakamato, but there is no petach if the Mishkan's not built. Ukvar dashu al petach ol moed bizman shu patuach v'lo bizman shu meforak. Right? It can't be when it's disassembled. V'amru shlamim sheshachatu kodem sheniftechu dlatot ha'echal psulim. Right? You can't bring a carbon when the doors aren't open. Shlema v'shachatu petach al moed bizman shepatuach v'lo bizman shenaol v'chein b'mishkan ad shelo ha'emidu halevim et hamishkan. You can't bring karbanos. You need a Mishkan to be standing. Once they took it down, once Moshe Rabbeinu disassembled the Mishkan, you can't bring a karban. Essentially, says the Ramban, the Mishkan had to function. For the Mishkan to function, it had to be built. So therefore, he assumes, and he doesn't really have a textual proof for this, he assumes that because it was clear in the Miluim that Moshe Rabbeinu built it and took it down every single day, that's without question. So it must be that he took it down, right before the morning, and he put it right back up. And so there was no period of time in which it really wasn't erected. I'm skipping a little bit, says the Ramban. V'hakatuv she'amar kan vayechas he'anan et ol moed uchvod Hashem moleh et hamishkan va'al da'atam hayazeh biyom hashmini. Right? That's by Yom HaShmini, that God's presence, that the Shechina finally comes to the Mishkan. Ki amar vaychal Moshe ha'melacha. He finished all the work. V'ka'asher kila hakama zo shel achad b'Nisan. Once Moshe Rabbeinu put up the Mishkan for good, kisa ha'ananat ha'mishkan. Only then did the Shechina come, which was the whole purpose of the Mishkan. Really for everyone, but certainly for the Ramban. Right? That it was a manifestation. It was a recreation of Maimon Har Sinai. The Shechina was everything. Ukvar katav Rashi mashe darshu vayetzu vayvarchu ha'am lefi shekol shivat yimei hamiluim Shehemid Moshe Mishkan hayam mishamesh bo mefarko lo sharta bo shchina. Because every one of the 7 days of the Miluim, Moshe Rabbeinu built and took it down and did all the avoda, there was no shchina. V'hayu Yisrael nichlamim v'amrim l'Moshe Rabbeinu kol hatorach shetarachnu shetishre shchina beinenu v'neinda shenitkaper lanu avon ha'egel. Right? All this work that we've done to build the Mishkan, by which we will know that God forgave us for the egel. And by the way, that works for the Ramban also. Even if you think that the Mishkan was lechatchila and was going to be built without a sin of the egel, the fact of the matter is there was a sin of the egel. Omar lehem, so Moshe said to them, don't be disappointed. Aharon achi kidai v'chashuv mimani. Aharon, my brother, is more important than me. Sha'al yidei karbanotav va'avodatav tishre banu shchina. Right? Moshe did all the avoda during the Shiva Simei Miluim. But he said when Aaron HaKohen starts to do it on the 8th day, that's when the Shechina is going to come. Upashat Miluim Yachol Hu Kam HaMishkan B'Rosh Chodesh V'Sharta Shechina B'Shmini L'Chodesh. Maybe you would have thought that this day of Hakamat HaMishkan is not the first day of Nisan. It's the 8th day of Nisan. And the Torah is referring to the Miluim. So he says, no, that can't be. Talmud Lomar B'Yom Hakimat HaMishkan Kiseh Ha'ananat HaMishkan L'Ol Ha'idut Milamed Shebiyom Sheukam HaMishkan Sharta Shechina Al Yidei Maaseh Aharon. No, Aaron brought the Shechina on the first day of Nisan, which was the 8th day of the Miluim, which will be described in greater detail in Parsha Shmini. V'hayazeh mipnei shehakatuv yisader ki tziva Hashem et Moshe tiyeh hakamat HaMishkan lechalota b'yom hachodesh harishon be'echad lachodesh v'amar ki Moshe asar kein v'chila et kol ha'melacha v'az kisah ha'anan et ha'oel. V'chein tamid, says the Ramban, that's the end of the parsha. The Shechina comes. V'chazar hakatuv el tchilat hadibur asher haya leMoshe min ha'oel v'amar vayikra el Moshe v'chol zeh b'seder nachon. What happens immediately after the Ashras HaShechina in Parshas Pekudei? Says the Ramban, Parshas Vayikra. Vayikra el Moshe. Right? That's the result. That's the continuation. That's the purpose of the Mishkan. Vayikra Moshe v'aydavar Hashem elav me'ohel moed le'mor. Now the ohel moed is not Moshe's tent. The ohel moed is in the Kodesh or the Kodesh HaKadashim. That's the purpose of the Mishkan. And that's the order of the Mishkan. But I think there's something else going on. And of course the Ramban believes that this is the Pshat and Psukim, but it fits into something else. The Ramban in his Hakdama to Sefer Shmos talks about the fact that Sefer Shmos is known by Chazal as Sefer HaGeula. And of course that's true. But the Ramban is bothered by the following question. Okay, the Sefer HaGeula, so fine. That takes us through Bishalach. That takes us through Kriyas Yamsuf. But what about the rest of the Sefer? Why is that called Sefer HaGeula? And so says the Ramban in the Hakdama to Sefer Shmos, V'zeh ba'avur ki yiridatam sham hu reshit hagalut ki mi'az huchal. Right? The Galus started at the beginning of Sefer Shmos when they went out to Mitzrayim. V'inei hagalut einenu nishlam ad yom shuvam el mikomam ve'el ma'alat avotam yashuvu. The Geula doesn't come. The Galus doesn't end till Bnei Yisrael return to the status of their forefathers. When we left Egypt, okay, we're no longer slaves. They're still in exile. They're just in the middle of the midbar. They didn't know where to go. But once they came to Har Sinai, and once they built a miniature Har Sinai in the form of the Mishkan, V'hishra shchinato beinehem, and God's Shechina came back to rest amongst Bnei Yisrael. Az shavu el ma'alat avotam shahayasod eloka alei ahalehem. They literally became merkava l'shchina, like Avraham was, like Yitzchak was, like Yaakov was. It's true. We didn't go into Eretz Yisrael. Physically, we didn't have the Geula. But spiritually, when we return to the status of the forefathers, that is the Geula. Vehem heim hamerkava. We became, it's a little Kabbalistic, the chariots of God. Va'az nechshavu geulim. And at that point, we became geulim, the geula came. And so for the Ramban, the end of Parshas Pekudei had to be Vayechas he'anan et ol moed uchvod Hashem maleh hamishkan. Right? Uvehe'alot he'anan me'al hamishkan yisu b'nei Yisrael b'chol ma'asehem. Ve'im lo ye'aleh he'anan v'lo yisu ad yom he'alato. Why? Ki anan Adonai al hamishkan yomam ve'esh tihiyeh layla bo le'einei kol beit Yisrael b'chol ma'asehem. Because that's the geula. When God comes and lives amongst us, when every day I can get up and go to the Mishkan and visit God and feel His presence, when every day I can see something that reminds me of Maimad Har Sinai, that's a recreation of Maimad Har Sinai, that's the geula. And that's what Bnei Yisrael were zocheh to. And therefore, despite the fact that Vayikra will come back and revisit some of the topics that we dealt with in Pekudei, in particular Yom Hashmini, right, and that will be associated with the death of Nadav and Avihu, but the Torah needed to give us the geula at the end of Pekudei in order for there to be one book of the Galut, starting with Shmos, and the geula ending in Pekudei. Okay, Yashkach to everybody. We did a few Rambans today. We did Kashet Tzivah Hashem et Moshe, that difficult pasuk, which appears many, many times in our parsha, and it means something other than as God commanded Moshe, or it means as God commanded Moshe, not as Moshe understood it. We saw why the Torah explains to us that the gold became like threads, because we need to understand that. We saw the fact that the means is also a mitzvah, that every avoda that we did in the Mishkan was called an avoda, a complete work, and that's avodat Hashem. Avodat Hashem is building the Mishkan, is building the kelim of the Mishkan. We saw that the end of the parsha for the Ramban is definitely the 8th day of the Miluim, that Rosh Chodesh Nisan was opening day of the Mishkan, and we saw why that had to be, because the Ramban's literary understanding of Sefer Shmos, like all the Sfarim, being a complete book, starting with the Galut and ending with the Geula. Shabbat Shalom to all, and see you next week.